Well, this is a little bit of a different interview than you may be accustomed to. I have the privilege and the honor of being able to speak with Simeon, the CEO of the Compute Exchange. Welcome, Simeon.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, most of you are accustomed to me interviewing both mainly hardware CEOs. Simeon, I think the term polymath would absolutely fail to capture the impressive breadth of your educational background, interest, and your career as well. As a Harvard trained MBA, you also have your master's in finance and your BS in ECE from UT Austin. You have quite an eclectic group of interests, including foreign policies, NGOs, and like a couple of my favorite people, including Tim Ferriss, are a self-professed Japanophile. And so you've worked at big tech companies, startups, and even founded your own successful AI startup, all before founding the Compute Exchange. But I'm going to let you pick it up from there. And for those unfamiliar with your background, can you tell us a little bit about your career before joining or before starting Compute Exchange?
Sure, sure. And that was probably one of the best intros I've ever had. I would say, being the son of two PhD applied mathematicians, they may disagree with the polymath, but I will tell them that others may see me that way. The way I like to describe my career is that I've always tried to sit at the intersection of three things, and that's business, technology, and policy. And to be a little more specific about that, for me, what really excites me is when I get to work on a cutting edge, really innovative challenge. And for most of my career, that's been the broader speaking AI space. So that's the technology piece. Apply that technology in a business sense where we actually build something that generates revenue and does it at scale, ideally globally. And then, of course, has some kind of a positive impact on people. Because for me, it's not just about any one of those silos, and that's where the policy piece comes in. And as you mentioned, I've been blessed to have gotten to do that a variety of times and places. And one of the ones I'm most proud of is I actually started my career as a high school student working at our national nuclear lab. So some may know Los Alamos, which is where the nuclear bomb was first developed, and then a sister lab, Sandia, which is known for the engineering behind those weapons, and now, of course, has a much more diversified portfolio. I think is a great example of kind of this intersection where I worked on cutting edge technologies in a business context, but of course, for a national security or slash policy purpose.
That's really cool. And that catches us up to today. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Compute Exchange does?
Of course. So we are the first, and so far only, as far as I know, true financial exchange for computing power. And some people use AI infrastructure interchangeably with compute. We think compute is the right term. So what does this mean? It means that we're like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange for oil, or Nasdaq for stocks, except we're doing this for compute. And you may ask, well, why is that important? Why do you need an exchange? There's already compute out there, right? And in my view, it really comes back to my experience being one of the leaders of AI infrastructure at Apple, which was one of the largest users of compute in the world, to supporting the large neo cloud Lambda Labs, working for the CEO Stephen, and seeing really both sides of a very unfortunately inefficient market where buyers struggle to understand what is it that they're actually getting. They're they're being quoted prices that range $10 to $1.50 for conceivably the same thing. That's very hard for them to understand. And at the same time, certain types of compute are readily accessible and in high demand and high supply, and others are in super high demand and short supply, and both of those things can happen at the same time. And I think a lot of the mainstream media miss that nuance. But then on the provider side, they have to raise money, pay a lot of it up front. That money is often at high cost of capital or cost of equity when they raise, rounds of funding. They have to deploy under very tight schedules, operate these things, which take as much energy as some small to medium-sized cities, and all while their chips are depreciating on a variable schedule that makes their side of the business model hard. And so I took the view that I think an exchange, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, is a great way to make the overall compute economy much more efficient, much more accessible, much more transparent. And ultimately, since compute, as we say in the Bay Area, is the picks and shovels of AI, if we make this better, then everything that flows above it becomes better as well.
Brilliant. What was there an aha moment that inspired you to find to found the Compute Exchange?
Yeah, so I mentioned, I didn't say the time, but I was at Apple for about 3 years, and uh, sometimes frustrated by the experience I had as one of the largest, again, users of compute, that I went to the other side, to Lambda, and I very quickly saw just how difficult it is to be on that side as well. And there was a fortuitous dinner in February of 2024, so a little over a year ago, where I was at a table with the CEOs of many of the neoclouds, hosted by Don Wilson and Suna Syed. And Don Wilson and Suna are both co-founders of Compute Exchange. Don, as some may know, is the founder of DRW, one of the world's largest trading firms, kind of self-made. He started as the first trader and now has a team of over 2,000. And then Suna runs a venture studio and works with many of the iconic folks in AI and in tech in the Bay Area. And at that dinner, we started discussing the some of the things I already mentioned here about the inefficiencies in compute. And it's really in that moment that there was an unlock around this idea of building an exchange. And from there, 2 months later, we actually launched the company in April of last year.
That's incredible. And we first started interacting based on a common passion, which is democratization. For me, it's democratization of AI, and for you, broader speaking, the democratization of intelligence. Can you speak to our audience about why that's so important in your view?
Absolutely, and I happen to be wearing one of our democratized intelligence shirts today, where we have, of course, the American Eagle, hopefully liberating the GPU. The GPU is not on fire; it's being liberated so quickly that it's heating up, right? But yeah, I mean, I think about a year ago, a lot of people started talking about democratizing compute. But for us, compute is a means to an end, right? If you think of the product of AI as intelligence, then the thing you actually want to democratize is that intelligence. And making compute more efficient is a big step towards that. Um, the way I look at it is there's this economic principle of commoditize your complements. So if the product of intelligence, if the product of AI is intelligence, the complements of AI are compute, data, and models. I think we all see that the models are compressing in time between the leader and the laggards. And so I do think we're seeing that that's becoming commoditized over time. And with compute, I think we're seeing that also happen with the latest chips. The reason this is important is because if you commoditize the complements of your product, you you have the highest likelihood of that product reaching ubiquity. And the example I like to give is a lot of people compare AI to the Manhattan Project. When we think of the Manhattan Project in the late 1930s, early 1940s, computers fit inside of entire buildings, and the only people that could really afford computers were the government, right? Including places like Los Alamos and Sandia Labs. Um, it wasn't until IBM commoditized the cost of computer hardware and made it readily accessible for me and you to be talking on our laptops or on our phones, an open standard was put in place for TCP/IP and Ethernet so that we could communicate across computers. That the complements of the product of the internet were commoditized such that the internet has become ubiquitous, and now there's over close to 5 billion unique smartphone users. We're very far away from that with AI, and fundamentally, democratizing intelligence is about getting AI into the hands of everyone in the world. And I think you can't do that the way that compute's being done today.
So you've described what you guys are doing. How does solving these problems affect the average individual?
Well, in quite a few ways. Let's start from most, in my view, most immediate impact to impacts farther down the line. 4% of the US energy grid last year was used for AI data centers. It's projected that by 2030, that's going to go to at least 12%. That's net new, right? So that's not displacing of other things. We're going to grow by at least 3x the amount of energy that we consume to power these AI data centers. I mean, that affects everyone. It affects everyone because it could lead to higher energy prices. It affects everyone because you're going to have more of these data centers in your backyards. It affects everyone because there will have to be major US government-led initiatives around leveling up the capacity of energy generation and transmission in the US if we're going to be successful. And just as a comparison here, China has roughly 3 times the amount of energy generation capacity as us, and that's today, right? And they're scaling, I believe, even faster than we are. And so that's an example of one more immediate term impact of what we're doing. Now, medium to longer term, AI should not be in the hands of just a few people that happen to be in the Bay Area, working at a few of the big research lab companies or big tech companies, and having their fingerprints kind of with an outsized role in this. We think that academics are sorely underrepresented, as are folks and researchers in the government, as are small and medium businesses. And ultimately, through what we're doing, we want you to not be gated if you have a good idea because you can't access compute and you can't do so fairly and at a market efficient price. And so we really fundamentally believe that we need as many voices contributing to building out AI. And one way to do that more effectively is to build this market around compute.
So, Simeon, now you can't believe everything you read on the internet, but what I've seen is figures of $12 million that you raised about 10 months ago. And presumably you're using that to build out the platform, build up the customer base, and to just generally scale the company. Can you share about the progress you've made over the last year?
Sure. And I would start by saying you shouldn't believe everything you read on the internet because we did not actually raise $12 million. We raised a different sum, which we're not disclosing, in part because in our industry, in AI, a lot of people kind of measure your likelihood of success based on the amount you fundraised. And I think that that's absolutely wrong, especially for this business where we are not a model company. We're not a wrapper company. Our highest costs are headcount. They're not paying companies for compute. And so in any case, we didn't raise 12 million, but some of the most exciting, we raised a nice number, but it wasn't specifically 12 million. And so some of the things I've been most excited about are that we brought our product to market once we had hired the core engineering team in under 6 months, which is, for me, something I'm proud of, as we run a lean startup. We also launched the product for a low single-digit million number in terms of total cost to get it to market, right? Which I think, again, shows how efficient our business can be. A recent stat that we've had is since we launched the product in February, we had over $1 billion of supply in the market. Now, what does this mean? It means that across our over a dozen providers that we work with regularly, and that number is increasing every week, we've had 25,000 GPUs over a period of 2 months that were available for on average durations of a year or more. And when you take that together, that's over $1 billion. Now that sounds great for a startup that launched its product 2 months ago, and at this point 3 months ago. But we estimate that the compute economy is about $500 billion. So we're at 0.5%, which is both good because it's plenty of room to grow, but also it means we got a lot more work to do.
Well, the great segue. What are some of the goals that you guys have for the company over the next 12 months?
Sure. I think a large part of what I have to do personally, but the company needs to do as well, is educate. Because when you look at the way that compute is procured today, you have, and let's take a large Fortune 500 company that has a medium to large size AI effort. They're typically spending between $50 to $250 million per year on compute. They have a large procurement team. That procurement team goes out and solicits bids from lots of providers. Those providers, they do that by getting them on the phone, like literally getting them on the phone or on a call like we are. They take 30 minutes to an hour with each. They get their information. They do that 10 or 12 times. Then they go back to the internal team. The internal team says, let's work with these 6. Those 6 then typically do a POC or a test before you buy. Then there's negotiation in the background, and then the team says, "Okay, we'll narrow it down to these 3 finalists." And then there's some more negotiation. Then you finally get to the number, right, into the one. And this process typically takes a month to, in some cases, 6 to 9 months. To me, that's incredibly inefficient. It's incredibly inefficient, and you're paying a lot of people along the way to do things that very much can be done via technology. And for those that are familiar with eBay and auctions, what literally just happened there was a very protracted auction, right? You basically take your in this case asks from providers, and then you ask them to compete down to get the best price, right? We're basically doing that in an hour to a day. And so we need to educate people that what we're actually doing is no different than what they've already been doing. It's just done programmatically through a platform. So I'd say that's one. I'll give you one other one, which is there's a lot of medium-term investments that we need to start making now for them to bear fruit in the medium term. So when we think about building a true financial market for compute, one of the things that's missing is standards, right? When you think about like a stock or a bond, they typically have a rating. Moody's is one of the rating agencies, right? Is it AAA or is it junk? Um, how does even an experienced buyer understand the offering by a hyperscaler in a particular data center versus a neo cloud in a different data center in a different region? It's very difficult, and even if you do test before you buy it, you may not even get the right information at that time that makes it apples to apples. And so something we are working actively on is putting together a group of industry leaders, similar to Anthropic's Economic Advisory Council, to inform on the standards that would dictate compute globally. And so that's something that you can imagine is not unlike a startup that can ship a product in a few months, something that will happen in a week, but we're working on it actively.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about that because the past few years have ushered in an AI arms race of sorts,
Mhm.
especially in the AI infrastructure scale up and build out. And some hardware makers argue that marketplaces like the Open Compute Exchange are bad for their business. What's your take on that?
First, I would encourage them to reach out because every provider I've worked with loves to work with us, and some of them are on our website, and you're welcome to talk with them. Um, what we are doing is making it crystal clear why provider A is differentiated from provider B. And in some cases, that means provider A can charge more than provider B versus today. And in other cases, it means they won't be able to charge more and they might actually charge less. What I fundamentally disagree with is that what we're doing is building a race to the bottom. Our goal is not to get the cheapest price of compute in every single case. Our goal is to create a market efficient price so that there's liquidity in the market, so that you don't have to be locked into multi-year contracts as a buyer. Instead, you can go out and buy a futures contract for what you need. And when you don't need it anymore, you can sell it back. As a provider, you're not locked into very expensive debt deals or even more expensive equity issuances. Instead, you can announce to the market, I'm building this thing 10 months from now, help me price it and help me fund it in this market. To me, that's a big win-win. That's where we want to go. And honestly, I haven't had a provider come to us yet that says, "Oh, your business model sucks and hurts for us." Now, we haven't talked to everyone out there, and so if you have talked to some of those people, I'd love to meet them.
All right. Well, and AI in general is just evolving at a breakneck speed. And this is one of my favorite questions to talk with founders and leaders like yourself about. Are there any corners that people aren't looking around or trends that you see coming in AI that many executives may be missing?
It's a good question because I mean AI is so broad, right? And I think AI can affect literally every dimension of us. And so let me think. I'll try and answer that I'll try to answer that three different ways. So one at the chip layer, one at the compute layer, and then one at the model application layer. So at the chip layer, there's a large crop of rising accelerator companies, and those companies are largely targeting inference workloads. Now, for those that are in the industry, they know that inference will eclipse training in terms of demand by a wide margin once AI is at scale. And so the unknown is, will NVIDIA dominate in inference as it is dominated in training? And at least in the calls I've had with folks where we talk about these things, I really say it's like the three-headed Hydra. And for those that know the Hydra mythical beast, you have to chop off all three heads at the same time to slay the beast. And so it's the chips, it's the software, and it's the networking. And today, nobody comes close to beating NVIDIA on all three of those simultaneously. Um, with that said, we love working with NVIDIA, and we're close partners with them. And they're what they have built is what everyone wants, and that's why it's the primary thing that we currently offer on our market. But I think what isn't necessarily intuitive to everyone is just how far off, or said another way, how far ahead NVIDIA is compared to its other competition. So that's one. I would say at the cloud layer, right, the infrastructure layer where we spend most of our time, I would say it's what I mentioned earlier. The market is opaque, and because it's opaque, I think most people miss that you can have a shortage of GPUs at the same time you have a surplus of them. And that's counterintuitive to understand, but you can have a 2-year-old chip in the H100 whose price has dropped from a peak of maybe $399 to $499 to today around $1.40 to $1.60. At the same time, you have GB200s, which are in much shorter supply, much newer chip, and maintaining their price over the few months that they've been sold now and deployed. So I'd say that's the second. Then maybe the third at the model layer is we're still seeing a lot of innovation when it comes to improving how models are created and how data and synthetic data are made, and whether that's through some of the innovations that we saw with DeepSeek, or through some of the things that we've seen on the United States side. There's still a lot of innovation happening there, and that innovation is also happening in China at the chip layer, where, as I'm sure you've probably read, a week ago or so, Huawei announced seemingly a very competitive chip to NVIDIA's chip. Now, the devil's in the details, and if it's actually as good, and I at least haven't had the chance to test it. But I'd say those are probably, I'd say three, maybe four. The competition's ratcheting up is the fourth one with China.
Well, and what a great segue to the next question I've got, because there's not a business out there that hasn't either been touched or at least had to pay attention to all the recent developments regarding tariffs and export controls. How do you see that potentially impacting the compute exchange business, or will it?
So we're a global company, and since we launched, we've had customers as well as partners, specifically providers all over the world, from Europe, Middle East, North America to Asia. And I don't see that changing. Now, we're a US company, which means we have to follow US regulations and laws, which means if there are restrictions to companies such as those in China, then we have to, of course, abide by those. But outside of that, tariffs don't directly impact us. But what we enable to occur, which no one has been able to do so far, is to actually show the impact of macroeconomic events like tariffs, or like a war, or like a chip shortage on compute prices globally, right? And so by having a more transparent market with actual market pricing from across the world, we're able to show those effects. And I can tell you that we are seeing prices for compute trend upward in regions where there are export controls being put into place, and where providers are trying to rush ship OEM servers and chips before some of those tariffs take effect. Uh, I would say for most US consumers, though, and again, each provider is different, but for the providers that I know, most of the components don't actually come from China, which has the largest tariffs. They come from Taiwan, Vietnam, and other Asian countries, which are not as subject to the more extreme tariffs as China is. And so I do expect, and I have seen a slight price adjustment upward as a result, but not 100%.
So you talked earlier about being very proud of building a lean engineering team, and one of your goals over the next 12 months is really educating. As people get educated and interest increases, you're going to need to grow the company as well.
Mhm.
Um, Startups in particular are sensitive because the wrong hire at an early stage can
Mhm.
affect the entire business. What are some of the qualities that you've looked for in hiring, and that you do look for in hiring top engineering talent?
Sure, it's a great question. I would actually start, however, by saying you're absolutely right that every company will need to scale. One of the things that I'm excited about is at scale. And for me, the definition of scale and success for this company is that 51% or more of global compute is transacted through us and it's done in a seamless way to where most people don't even know we exist, right? If you own NVIDIA stock and you sell it with your broker, you really don't care that it's listed on NASDAQ. You just want to know that the bid-ask spread that you're likely to get. And that's where we ultimately want to get with Compute Exchange. And at that scale, we're not talking about a 10,000 person company. We may not even be talking about a 1,000 person company. It is a fairly lean business, especially from an engineering standpoint, which is one of the things that I'm excited about, and I think our investors are too. Now, in terms of your question around engineering talent, we like to say that we only hire A players. And for us, A players, we define as the top 10% in their given field. Now, how do we discern the top 10%? I mean, candidly, good people want to work with good people, and good people know good people. And so far, in our earlier stage, we've largely hired through our network. Now we're at the stage now where we need to hire maybe a bit more and a bit more senior folks, and we're looking at, I would say, three things. One, especially with the more senior hire, is that it may be odd to say, but they've been rejected by a bureaucratic large company organization, right? The DNA of that organization has rejected them. Why? Because they're hungry. They go and break things, right? In a good way. They rock the boat and maybe don't get along politically well with other people, right? And they care more about doing the work than getting credit for the work. Like, for any one of those reasons, myself included, we can get rejected by bigger companies, and so we look for that especially in more senior people. I think in the second thing is no problem is beneath anyone. Um, I've gone out and bought lunch for the team at our offsite. I regularly have to go through many mundane tasks because they fall on my lap, and I don't want to burden someone else with them. And we expect that of everyone. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone should take every task and hold on to it forever, but we don't want balls to get dropped because someone's like, "That's not my job." Um, and then I'd say third is this insatiable hunger and willingness to be direct. We don't want to beat around the bush. We don't have time for that. We want people that will be respectful and direct, hungry to always be learning, and also have humility to know they don't know everything. And so I think we've done a great job of hiring a team so far that does that. But to your point, with growth, we have to make sure that we keep the bar where it's at.
Well, and as we wind down here, final question for you. Try to imagine a world 5 years from now. What impact do you want the compute exchange to have had on the world?
I want the compute exchange 5 years from now to have democratized or significantly led to the democratization of intelligence, and specifically because of our efforts, we have created compute into a fungible liquid asset that enables anyone, whether it's you, a small and medium business, or a researcher, to access what they need when they need it at a market efficient price. And by doing so, we have made AI ubiquitous in the world. That is what I hope we can achieve.
Well, I certainly think you're well on your way, and I hope that it's not 5 years from now when we're talking again. Maybe a year from now, we can have this conversation and talk about the year behind. But Simeon, really appreciate the time. If somebody does want to get a hold of the Compute Exchange, whether it be an investor, a potential customer, or an engineer, how would you ask them to get a hold of you?
They can get a hold through me. So my email is my first name, Simeon, at tcex.com. And just as a special treat for the people that will watch this, our original name was TCEX, which stands for the Compute Exchange. But a person smarter than me in marketing suggested changing the name because some people might pronounce it inappropriately. I'll leave it to your judgment how you might pronounce it. And so we've kept the email handle as maybe a little bit of an inside joke, but so it's Simeon at tcx.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you as well.